It was a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other. Gray skies, a biting wind, and the promise of rain hanging heavy in the air. Julian Thorne had driven 2 hours from the city to the sprawling, ivy-covered estate of his Aunt Martha, expecting nothing more than a day of manual labor. The annual charity gala was only days away, and Martha, in her usual chaotic fashion, was hopelessly behind schedule. Julian had resigned himself to lifting heavy boxes and climbing ladders, mentally preparing for the dust and the disarray. But the moment he stepped through the heavy oak front door, the atmosphere shifted. The hallway didn't smell like old paper and stress. It smelled of cinnamon tea and rain. And when he turned the corner into the grand library, he realized why the house felt different. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky? Or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? Alara Vance was there. Alara was a fixture in Martha's life, a neighbor, a confidante, a woman who possessed a quiet sort of magic that Julian had spent the better part of a year trying not to stare at. She was standing by a towering stack of vintage books, her back to him, humming a melody so faint it was almost part of the room's silence. She was wearing a thick, oversized knit sweater that swallowed her frame, and her hair was pulled back in a messy knot that threatened to unravel at any second. Julian paused in the doorway. He watched her for a moment, allowing himself that brief, stolen indulgence. Alara always seemed to move at a different tempo than the rest of the world. While everyone else sprinted, she drifted. While the world shouted, she whispered. She turned then, sensing his presence, and her face lit up with a smile that felt like the sun breaking through the overcast sky outside. "Julian," she said, her voice warm and melodic. "I didn't think you'd be here until later." "I drove fast," he replied, shaking off his coat. "I heard a rumor that Martha was trying to reorganize the entire library by herself. I came to save the books." Alara laughed, a soft, musical sound that seemed to settle in Julian's chest. "She's currently in the kitchen, arguing with a caterer on the phone. I think she's winning, but it's best we stay out of the crossfire." For the next hour, it was just the two of them. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, passing leather-bound volumes back and forth, dusting off shelves, and exchanging easy banter. The sunlight began to pierce through the high windows, casting long, golden beams across the Persian rugs, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful, domestic even. Julian found himself watching her hands as she worked. They were delicate, precise. She treated every book like a fragile artifact. He realized, with a sudden pang of clarity, that he wasn't just here to help his aunt. He was here because the idea of spending an afternoon in the same room as Alara Vance was the most compelling thing he could imagine. They were working on the upper shelves of a mahogany bookcase. Alara had insisted on using the stepladder, claiming she had a system for the arrangement that only she understood. Julian stood below, unwrapping a set of porcelain figurines that were to be auctioned off. "You know," Alara said, reaching high for a gap on the top shelf, "I've always thought this room had a personality. It's stubborn. It doesn't want to be organized. It takes after Martha," Julian teased, glancing up at her. "Careful, she has ears everywhere." Alara warned with a grin, stretching up on her tiptoes. That was the moment the atmosphere snapped. Alara reached just an inch too far. The vintage stepladder, perhaps uneven on the thick rug, gave a treacherous wobble. Julian heard the sickening sound of wood scraping against wood, followed immediately by a sharp intake of breath. He didn't think. He didn't analyze. Instinct took over completely. "Alara!" He dropped the bubble wrap he was holding and lunged forward. She was falling backward, her balance lost, her arms flailing for purchase in the empty air. Time seemed to distort, stretching that singular second into an eternity. He saw the panic flare in her eyes, saw the way her hand reached out blindly. He caught her mid-air. It wasn't a graceful catch from a movie. It was frantic and hard. His arms wrapped around her waist, and the momentum slammed them both against the nearest wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but he didn't let go. He held her tight, his chest heaving, his hands gripping her firmly to keep her from hitting the floor. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Alara was pressed against him, her feet dangling inches off the ground, her hands clutching his shoulders so hard her knuckles were white. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest, or maybe that was his own. "I've got you," he breathed, his voice rougher than he intended. "I've got you, Alara. You're safe." Slowly, carefully, he lowered her until her left foot touched the ground. But the moment she tried to put weight on her right ankle, she let out a sharp, stifled cry and crumpled against him again. "Don't," Julian commanded softly, tightening his hold. "Don't put weight on it. You twisted it?" I'm fine," she stammered, though her voice lacked its usual composure. "I just slipped. I felt so clumsy." "Forget clumsy," Julian murmured. He was acutely aware of everything about her in that moment. The scent of vanilla and old paper that clung to her sweater, the warmth of her body radiating against his, the way her breath hitched, warm and frantic against his neck. They were standing in the golden afternoon light, caught in an embrace that was born of necessity but was rapidly turning into something else. Julian looked down at her. Her face was flushed, her eyes wide and searching. She wasn't pulling away. "Can you stand?" he asked, though he made no move to release her. "I think so," she whispered. But she didn't move. She stayed there, leaning into his strength, her forehead resting momentarily against his collarbone. It was a gesture of such unconscious trust that it made Julian's throat go tight. "Hair," he said, shifting his position. "Lean on me. The sofa is just over there." He took her weight onto his side, his arm wrapped securely around her waist, her arm draped over his shoulder. It was a slow, clumsy dance across the library floor. Every time she winced, he halted, murmuring quiet reassurances, adjusting his grip to take more of the burden. "I'm so heavy," she muttered, looking down, her hair falling over her face to hide her embarrassment. "You're not," Julian corrected instantly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're light as a feather. Just focus on breathing." When they finally reached the velvet sofa, he helped her sit, handling her with a tenderness that surprised even him. He knelt before her, not as a servant, but as a man entirely captivated by the woman in front of him. He gently lifted her injured foot, resting it on the ottoman. "Does it hurt much?" he asked, looking up into her eyes. "It's throbbing," she admitted, finally meeting his gaze. The panic of the fall had faded, replaced by a lingering, charged silence. The air between them felt heavy, electric with things unsaid. Julian didn't move away. He stayed kneeling, his hand resting instinctively on her knee to steady her. "I should get some ice," he said, but he made no move to stand up. "Thank you," Alara said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "For catching me. I really hate feeling helpless. I've spent a long time learning how to not need anyone." Julian saw the vulnerability in her expression, a crack in the armor of the capable, independent woman he had admired from afar. It drew him in. "Everyone needs someone to catch them sometimes, Alara," he said softly. "There is no weakness in letting someone else take the weight for a minute." She looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as Martha's nephew, not as the guy who helped move boxes, but as a man who was currently holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "You're very good at this," she noted, a small, shy smile touching her lips. "Being the hero. I'm no hero." Julian shrugged, his thumb brushing inadvertently against the fabric of her jeans, a touch that sent a jolt through him. "I just happened to be in the right place." "No," she insisted softly. "You were there. That's what matters." The distance between them seemed to vanish. In the quiet of the library, with the dust motes slowing their dance in the fading light, the world outside ceased to exist. Julian could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. He could see the pulse jumping in her throat. He realized that he didn't want to be anywhere else. He wanted to be the one who caught her, today, tomorrow, and every day after that. He leaned in just slightly, a microscopic movement, but she didn't recoil. Instead, she leaned toward him, her eyes dropping to his lips before flickering back up to his gaze. It was a question asked and answered in silence. "Julian." The voice came from the hallway, shattering the bubble. They both jumped, pulling back as if burned. Martha bustled into the room a second later, brandishing a cordless phone like a weapon. "That caterer is a nightmare!" "Julian, thank goodness you're— oh, my heavens." "Alara, why are you on the sofa? Why is Julian on the floor?" The spell was broken, but the air still hummed with the resonance of it. "I slipped, Martha," Alara said, her voice steadier now, though her cheeks were stained a lovely shade of pink. "Julian saved me from a nasty fall. I'm gonna get some ice," Julian said, standing up. He felt unmoored, the loss of contact with her leaving a physical ache in his chest. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back. Alara was watching him. She wasn't looking at Martha. She was looking right at him. Her expression was open, soft, and filled with a new kind of knowing. He went to the kitchen, fetched the ice pack, and returned. The rest of the afternoon was filled with the mundane logistics of injury. Elevating the foot, Martha fussing, discussions about doctors. But beneath the chatter, a new current flowed. Every time Julian passed the sofa, Alara's eyes would follow him. When he handed her a glass of water, Their fingers brushed, lingering a second longer than necessary, sparks flying in the contact. When he eventually helped her out to her car later that evening, supporting her weight once more, the intimacy returned, stronger than before. He settled her into the driver's seat. Her left foot was fine for driving an automatic and stood by the open door, the cold evening air biting at his cheeks. "Drive safe," he said, leaning down. "I will," Alara replied. She hesitated, then reached out, her hand covering his where it rested on the doorframe. Her skin was warm against the cold metal. "Julian, thank you, not just for the catch, but for everything, anytime, Alara," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I'm not going anywhere," she smiled, and this time, it wasn't just a polite expression. It was a promise. As she drove away, her taillights disappearing down the long, winding driveway, Julian stood on the porch steps. The wind was colder now, the night fully descended, but he didn't feel the chill. He felt the warmth of her hand on his, the weight of her body in his arms, and the certain knowledge that this regular Tuesday was not the end of a story, but the very first page of something remarkable. He turned back toward the house, the ghost of her perfume still lingering in the air, and for the first time in a long time Julian Thorne knew exactly where he was supposed to be.